Thank you all very much for coming out this evening to support TJ Fabby. It's a real privilege and a delight to speak on his behalf. But I want to start with where we really began tonight, and that's with the Psalms, I believe. Psalm 146 says, "Do not put your trust in princes." Or that's the Old Testament term for elected or appointed officials. And I think that is perhaps the greatest challenge that we have today. When I was a freshman, I had been to the Capitol, unlike Representative Stickland before, but it was a good number of years before. But it's a great and glorious building, and it can cause you to awe that you've been placed to serve there. But quickly, you realize that it's kind of like those whited sepulchres that Jesus spoke about in the New Testament, but inside are dead men's bones. When I returned after my first session, I took about 2 weeks off and I went up to Colorado and ultimately to Montana to see one of my grandsons, throw him in the air, and it took me about a week to recover and to begin to think straight after my first session. But when I came back to that glorious building, my stomach turned upside down. I never really had that happen. I'm not really that kind of person. But I'm so thankful that God is raising up people like TJ Fabby and like others you've heard from this evening. As a sophomore, I tell people that I know enough to be really dangerous. But the real danger is changing. And the biggest message that my constituents told me repeatedly, and this second time to run for re-election, was don't change. There were many times that I didn't have these people to stand with me. I had Bill Zedler and Brian Hughes and others, but it was pretty lonely at times to serve the Texas House a couple of terms ago. And I'm so thankful for them being there and for God raising up, I believe, others like him, Philip Eby and TJ Fabby, men of principle, men who don't just put their finger to the wind. We did see that, Gio. We saw it time and time again. People that now were running for statewide office, they wanted to see how we were voting. They'd come by my desk and they would ask me, "Well, what are your no votes on the local and consent counters?" "Well, I'm not through counting them up yet." But I want to, before I make a plea for your pocketbook and for your word of mouth advertising, I want to make a plea for your heart, and that you would use your knees. Because the greatest fear I have is that I will change. And I won't change for the worse, I'll change for that I will change for the worse. And I fear that. It is a great temptation to just go along to get along, to do what it takes to be re-elected. That's what's on the radar screen as soon as you win the primary and the November election. Pray for TJ that he would continue to be a man of integrity, that he'd be full of wisdom, and he'd be courageous. This is how he's campaigning, and I believe that's the kind of man that he will remain if he is elected to the Texas House. Pray for the rest of us that we would not not change, that we would be those kind of people. Psalm 146 tells us to put our trust in the God who shall reign forever. And that always bothered me. But why does it say shall reign or will reign? It's talking about tomorrow. I mean, He reigns now. But I think that's what we forget, is that God is on His throne. And He is doing all things well. Amen. And we do not need to worship 181 people in Austin to run our lives, to feed us, to protect us, to tell us where to live and what jobs to have. And we certainly don't need that in Washington. We just need to fear God. Amen. And that's really the most crucial thing that Philip needs, and TJ needs, Jonathan needs, Matt and Bill, Gio and me, is that we would remember to do what's right. Because God sees when even the people don't see. And God hears when even y'all don't hear. And we need to do what's right for Him on the last day. What's made Texas great? What's made the United States great? It's freedom. It is being like our Maker. It's using our freedom responsibly. To love Him, to work, to worship, to treat our neighbor as we would want to be treated. There is a place for force, but it's real small. It's simple. Defend us from our enemies. Punish the wrongdoer who harms his neighbor and won't correct it. Enforce contracts. Besides that, we shouldn't be using force. Government should get out of the way. And not just in Washington, but in Austin. And even locally. I'm so thankful for Paul Perry and what he's doing as a county commissioner. We need that on the school boards. We need big individuals, big families, big churches, and big business in that sense. We need small government. That's what's made Texas and the United States great. Now, most of y'all probably know, sadly, that this is Earth Day. Well, I was only greeted one time yesterday with Happy San Jacinto Day. And that was really disappointing. I want to tell you a quick story before I close. Some of y'all heard this. Maybe even TJ's told you the story, but he wears a pin on his lapel. And it has to do with what happened about 178 years ago. Remember, before San Jacinto, there were some tough days. But they paved the way for San Jacinto, Goliad, the Alamo. And before that, Gonzales. When they came to get our guns that the government had given the citizens there to protect us from the terrorists of those days. Well, anyway, they heard about this in Georgia, about 800 miles away. And they, on November 12, 1835, raised $3,000 to outfit 150 Georgia volunteers to leave their spouses, their children, their farms, and to march to Texas to fight for its independence. When they left the little town of Macon, Georgia, their first stop was Knoxville. And there, the Troutman family ran a little inn. And they knew that they were coming. And a 17-year-old girl took her white silk skirt. She took what she could, and she made a banner for these volunteers who would eventually give their lives for Texas independence. And she took that white silk skirt and made one of the earliest Lone Star flags, put a blue star on the front and back, and on the front she wrote, "Texas and Liberty." That was the cause for which they were going to fight. But on the back of that flag, she wrote their motivation in Latin. It said, "Where liberty dwells, there is our country." They marched all the way from Georgia to Texas to preserve liberty. They had that patriot dream that our forefathers wrote about and we sing about. In the last stanza, the fourth stanza, or depending on which version you look at, of America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years of alabaster cities that gleam undimmed by human tears. Their patriot dream was not really ultimately on this earth. It was in heaven. It wasn't in the Palestine and the Middle East. It was the Palestine above, where there are no more tears, where freedom is used responsibly to worship the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. We won't be robots there. There won't be a dictator in that sense. That we will be voluntary servants in heaven. That's the kind of vision they had. And that's why they came to Texas, because they loved liberty. They knew that prosperity and peace came from individuals. It's the lack of government that's made us a great nation.
Amen.
But it's a responsible use of self-government that has made us great. Pray for TJ. Pray that he won't change, that he will persevere with his campaign, and he will come to the Texas House to protect not only his liberty, but your liberty. It's easy to protect our own. It's a whole lot harder to protect others, and that's the kind of man TJ is. I want you to think about, what is your white silk skirt? What can you give? That's what she could give, Joanna Troutman, in 1835.